Okay, so after, I had written something on professional development, but I'm gonna kind of go in a few different directions. But I'm gonna start with a conversation that some of us had this morning, which is what I believe one of the things this university could do that would make you the most unique college in the United States. And that would be to create 4 small businesses: nails, barbershop or hair, coffee, and food trucks. The reason I say this is there's an underground economy inside of prison. To survive, people don't have families that have money that give it to them. So if you've been in prison 5 years, you have no money. So you have to have a hustle, as they say in prison. You've got to make a hustle. And the women who do hair, you know, if you do someone's hair, you'll get coffee and a creamer. Other women who are talented, there's no birthday cards you can buy, so people make birthday cards out of recycled letters and magazines. So nothing is thrown away, and it's amazing what they do. Then they take, they knit and crochet other people, and they get paid for it, and they make a Louis Vuitton bag for someone to send home to their mother. And how they do it is they crochet the Louis Vuitton advertisement from the magazine on either side of the bag, and they use the colors of Louis Vuitton, and it really looks amazing. Other women cook. A lot of the Spanish mamas were making tamales, and for $1.50 you get a tamale and they get something. The for me, I couldn't physically carry my laundry twice a week down. It was too heavy for me, and the hill was too hard for me. So they volunteered to do it for me because I didn't need commissary money because I had my own money, and I didn't charge for anything, and I worked on everybody's papers that they needed. Sometimes I worked with a translator, but I did anything. People were constantly on my cell phone. So what I'm saying is, in thinking last night about what is the most welcoming thing that can be done for formerly incarcerated people, and to give them confidence, and to put them in a position where they interact, but in a way that benefits them, would be to open something like a nail salon, which they know how to do, they have confidence in. I'm not suggesting other students don't, but this is a big thing. They love doing nails. And having it open to the public to come in and start it small, and then grow it as capacity warrants. Second thing is hair and barbershop. You're talking about women who are doing hair, amazing hair, the entire time they're in prison, and they're doing it for coffee. It's not that hard to get the funding for a hair and barbershop. Food trucks in New York is a big thing for formerly incarcerated people. You could put your first food truck outside of the compound and support them, support them. If they're serving you food and charging you money, then they're also able to interact with you without it being uncomfortable for them. And there is a business, I thought it was in Texas, called She Brews. And it was a woman who committed to hiring only formerly incarcerated people. I think she only hired formerly incarcerated women. And it was so successful that she opened at least 1 or 2 more. People are drinking that coffee. It has to be great coffee. The products have to be great.
She was like, I would make a Jewish deli.
Oh, that's funny. Hebrews, Hebrews.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
I don't know, I just immediately thought Jewish deli. Like bagels and love.
that's funny. But, so, one
I
of the
get it, no
things,
fruits.
one of the things I'll tell you is that a culmination of thinking of what's the most important thing to do, I think this is the most important thing to do, because it'll draw out formally and create a physical space for the people working here to take breaks, because that's the way they create family, by knowing each other. If you're gonna do this, I urge you to do it I wanna do it with you, but I urge you to think about it this way. The best product is one that nobody knows about, and work on it quietly, get all the pieces together, roll it out together with the collegian writing stories about it, and make it happen. If it takes 6 months to a year, do it, but don't open one, open them together. If you can only get 2, open 2, but if you can get these 4, you've diversified in the areas formerly incarcerated people know the best. And you'd also be the only university on campus to have formerly incarcerated people doing very unique services. So with that, I'll say that everybody going into prison comes in from a different perspective, and prison is a great equalizer. You are not a privileged person any longer in prison. You are almost immediately within the first hour given a number and strip searched. So whatever you had outside is almost immediately taken away from you. Now, my experiences speak to women's experiences in prison. Men's experiences are quite different. And I was also in the federal system, not the state system. So I can tell you that every person came in with a certain level of mental health that was or not was good. There is nobody that takes a measurement when they do an intake and they do the medical. They do not take a mental health intake. So they do not know who they're dealing with, and they rely on you to tell them. So if you want meds, you're gonna say, I need mental health. If you wanna stay as far away from them as you can, you're gonna say, I don't have issues. And that's how it breaks down.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, this is not a talk.
That's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling we can shoot the breeze. I know that in men's state prison, people won't say that they have a mental health issue because it's stigmatized and they're bullied in prison. They're immediately a target. And so even if they have a mental health issue, they'll try to hide it and won't request medication that they know they need because it's stigmatized in the general population. So did you see that same thing
I saw the
with
same
women?
thing. Mostly, there are some people who are drug addicts who
Want any
will
medication.
take any medication. And if they can't get the medication they want, they'll even take blood pressure medication and snort it. You have a percentage of the population, and there's an RDAP program in prison that's useless because you have to be picked for it, and it's a terrible program. They really need drug counselors, and they really need to put the person wholly 24 hours a day into a drug program in order for it to be effective. You can't be in prison and deal with any kind of addiction. So everybody suffered traumas before they came in, and once they're in, everybody was exposed to levels of trauma that you can't imagine. So if you washed your underwear, everybody washed their underwear and bra, because if you sent your clothes to the cleaners, they came back gray. So we had white underwear and white bra, and people wanted to stay white. So it was illegal for us to do that. So we would wash it at 11 o'clock and hang it over our beds and grab it at 6 a.m. Sometimes the officers at the 12 o'clock shift would come by your bed and sniff those panties, which was...
One of her articles talks about that. You look on her website.
Okay. You'll
It's
be okay.
horrifying.
So what I'm saying to you is when people are washing it, other women might say you're dirty, that you don't know how to keep yourself clean. That's a big issue in prison. And if they see you wearing the same thing twice, it's a big issue in prison. There's 1,000 ways to traumatize you in prison outside of what the officers are doing with solitary confinement. It's inmate on inmate. People who are in pain, and the way to deal with the pain is to lash out. So you meet a woman who made $100,000 a month selling drugs, who had a Mercedes, who had a lot of bling, who took a limo anywhere she wanted. And I would say to her, what are you gonna do after prison? She said, well, I ain't going to McDonald's to work for $9 an hour. So you had a lot of people who had huge success. And there's no intersection for people to consider where, it's not just the jobs. Saying that we can't get jobs is not enough. We can't get opportunities to eat. And some people really wanna go, not back to their $100,000 drug dealing days, but they wanna go someplace where they can earn enough money to get a do they want, and buy a shirt they want, which we don't have. But what we had in common, whether you were, you had Asian women, you had American Indians or Native Americans, you had everyone in prison. And in order for us to survive, we had to work together. No one said it, but I'll tell you like a story so you understand a little bit of what happened in prison and why I call it a great equalizer. On Sunday they served eggs. It was the only breakfast that had protein. The rest of the week was pie, grits and pie for breakfast. And most women came in 0 to 10, and within 6 months had a weight gain of 50 pounds, an average weight gain. So nobody's dealing with that issue at all in terms of, like, if you ask everybody for their medical chart, nobody's ever taken a prison's medical charts and examined that weight loss and the consequences to someone's health. That's a missing area completely. And an even smarter area to look at is to take prisons that are in rural areas that have emergency rooms with one hospital nearby, and research, talk to the emergency doctors. And what you will find out is that people were brought to them already dying for conditions that could have been prevented. It'll be an eye-opening piece of research. So on Sundays we get eggs. And the eggs are cooked with this oil I don't think, whatever it was a nightmare and nobody ate the eggs. So in the kitchen, we stole eggs. But stealing eggs from the kitchen to get to the sleeping quarters required about 50 women. And because, because you had to avoid officers. So you needed women to distract officers. So first of all, bras in prison have no wire, and your breasts are hanging, and there's tons of room in them. They're awful looking, but they actually have so much room in them that you could put a whole chicken on the side. Okay? So the eggs would come. We would take, the women who were braver than me would take 12 dozen or however many and put them in the garbage in the kitchen. Then it was up to the kitchen workers, us, to move them from the garbage in the kitchen to the garbage outside the kitchen, where there are 3 guards. I always played the role of distracting people, because I couldn't steal. Some women would get a break before lunch, and the bigger women, and these were women with breasts that I'd never seen. Like, I thought I was big until I went to prison. And they carried the eggs. They had raw eggs, a dozen raw eggs in their bra. And they would look at me and say, you got big tits, just put 3, 4. I said, they'll break it. I said, I'll break it. I'm not doing that.
Put in trash and do distractions, that's what I can do.
This required ingenuity, chutzpah. I mean, you can't imagine, like, just the sheer act of coordinating this. It was 100 women's eyes were on this to make sure nothing was happening. So what I'm telling you is the camaraderie that had to happen just for the egg transfer. And then you have to walk it across. And then you have to get it past the officers in the unit. And then you also try to steal like a green pepper and onion to make it more interesting. And if you cook a green pepper or an
How did
onion,
y'all
it smells.
cook these?
Everything was, we made Big Macs. They
But
were
how did y'all
in a
cook
microwave.
these once you stole them?
Microwave.
Oh.
And they were delicious. They were delicious. The people who cook in prison are artists. So here's what would happen if an officer walked in and the officer immediately smelled the green pepper and the onions. So I was on the first bit, so near the kitchen. So they just pass it quickly to me. I'd pass it to the person on top of me. Person on top of me would be throwing the onions to other people on top bunks and throwing the green peppers. But it happened like that. By the time she got back there, there's nothing. And she said, I smell something, and everybody kept a straight face. Like, oh, okay. And then when she got back, everybody threw back the onions. You had to have a little, but try to understand the gall, the determination, the chutzpah in something like this. Please join us. No, come up here.
Hey, Rita. Get my message?
So, these are.
I'm gonna write that about that on the blog.
Well, when there's so much to share.
Yeah.
And I try to be intentional about getting people to focus on certain areas.
Yeah.
I always keep my age in mind. I figure I have 10 years left to work on this issue, and I want to use the 10 years, and hopefully more, to max. Because I don't know that I can travel around the way I'm traveling after 10 years from now. So now there are officers everywhere. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you'll just love the story, but it's meant to show you the absolute determination that people have. And you're not dealing as much trauma as people have from the experience. They have something else which nobody has. They have this strength, this desire to move forward, and this way of, like, if you give me an obstacle, I'm gonna say there are no obstacles. In prison, there are no obstacles. You learn to think that way, or you don't survive. So when we were talking, you were saying, oh, but this, oh, but you don't understand. None of us, okay, well, what's the obstacle, and well, what's the way around it? That's all. There's 3 officers there, okay, we'll get 6 people, we'll talk to them. But I do believe in my heart there's a way around everything. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we had chicken for lunch, which was, you'd think that would be a good thing, but it's not. Now, I was on the kitchen crew, and I'd have to get up at 6 to clean chickens. So they would have 3 big vats of ice water, and they would put frozen chickens in ice water, and I would say, how do you clean a frozen chicken? I mean, no matter what I did, and they said, nobody can clean this, so we put it on the trays, and they were cooked like that. Maybe some oil spread on them. So by the time the chicken came, none of us from the kitchen, nobody ate that chicken. What you missed is that bras in prison are very big, have no wire. There are women who are size Z in prison. And there's enough room to put anything in them.
You can smell the legs.
So on chicken day, now everything also around the campus, on chicken day,
Don't smell the chicken.
there, what do you call those hand gloves that they use in the kitchen, the latex gloves? There's thousands of them. So before you even sat down to lunch, you'd see women grabbing the latex, and each of them would get 6 or 8 latex. And so I'm sitting with people, and I'm literally watching them wiping off the chicken, putting it into the latex, sticking one here, 2 here, 4 or 5 pieces of chicken in their breasts. And they'd look at me and say, come on, Abby, just stick one in the middle. I'm not putting fucking chicken in my tits. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. So,
I'm a big boy.
No. But I'm telling you this so you understand that we're far more than you. We're far more. We can survive more than you can in some ways, and we have more trauma than you have. So it's a combination of both great and horrible, and you have to work with the great, and you have to treat the horrible. So,
So since I missed it, is the purpose for them to eat that later? Is that the?
well, you're gonna hear it.
Oh, okay. I'm going ahead, I'm sorry. I thought I had missed
So,
something.
no,
They did make eggs
Um,
later, they
yeah.
were good,
Yeah.
yes.
Much better than the
Now,
eggs they were serving.
we're frisked, every person is frisked coming out, but they're not allowed to touch your breasts. So most people put the chicken from here to here. They could have felt you here, but they don't. So if you're wearing a coat, they could make you take off your coat, but in the summertime, it's a little harder to steal the chicken than in the winter. So what I would do is walk out in front to the two officers who were, and I knew the three women who were behind me, and I'd raise my hands like this, so they would frisk me. And everybody knew frisking me was like a joke, because I never stole anything, because I couldn't steal a sweet and low. So, they frisked me, and while they were frisking me, they went around them. So this required coordination, because everybody was stealing the chicken. They take it back to the unit, and they're frisked along the way. It's not just those two officers. You have probably 8 officers in groups of 2. And you have the officer in your unit who knows you have the goddamn chicken in your breasts. And you have to get around that officer. So you have to make an emergency. So somebody would fall, trip, start crying hysterically, or fight with their girlfriend, knowing they might face solitary, start a fight. And the officer would stand there to wait and see if they're gonna hurt each other. But they were just helping the women. They were making a commotion so the women could sneak in with the chicken. We went to and people did it spontaneously. So you're talking about 50 women involved. Now, stealing from where the food came in, that was a whole level of different. But so they'd come into, people would hide you had to hide this stuff, and there was very few places to hide it. We were very innovative about hiding things. There's no hiding things under your mattress. There's no hiding things in your locker. So people who worked in the paint department would get us masking tape, and we would tape the chicken up to under a wall, like a styrofoam wall, where the lights would be. There'd be a lot of chicken under there. Taped till they were, this is ingenious stuff. So the people on the top bunk bed would be standing, and the tall women would be standing, and, you know. So,
We got our assignment. Okay.
so all this is to say to you that it took creativity, teamwork, putting aside all racist attitudes to make this happen, and this happened every day. What also happened, I told you about the chickens. For me, they were a remarkable group of women. They're more remarkable than you can imagine because of what I saw and because of how willing people were to go out on their own. And where there were disabled women or older women that were not being taken care of, they sat with them. Where there were people who couldn't steal the chicken, it didn't mean they couldn't have a piece of chicken at the end of the day. There's a handful of people nobody liked, as there always is, but this was a shared thing. Now, one woman one day got a Dear John letter from her husband. He wrote her saying, I'm divorced from you. Now, he had come for 2 years, so she didn't expect this. I'm divorced for 2 years. I divorced you, don't come back to the house, the kids are mine. She was suicidal, but the psychology unit was not gonna help her. They would have drugged her, but what everybody knew about that letter within a minute, 10 minutes, and people watched this woman, people who didn't know her watched this woman, kept an eye on her, walked with her 24 hours a day because she was suicidal or just distraught. You have no, they've taken your whole life away when they take your kids, and she had no place to go. This was so overwhelming. A second woman was a black older woman whose was in for drugs. Because she was in for drugs, she was not allowed to go to funerals. Most people couldn't go to funerals anyway. And her son and grandson were shot in a drive-by. She was devastated, and you can't go home, and you can't have closure with family. So people stayed with her 24/7. Now, I had gastric bypass surgery in 2012, and I went to prison a year after I had gastric bypass surgery. I had gained 65 pounds in prison. I'm still overweight from my second prison tour, but I was much heavier than this. And I landed up in a prison in Oklahoma, en route to my designated prison. And I had specific medical instructions that the only thing I could eat was protein. And so they would give me double rice instead of double protein, or they would give me, I was starting to, this was a prison in Oklahoma, where there were a lot of Mexican women who were gonna serve time and then get deported. And there were locals from Oklahoma who didn't talk to the other women and would say that they were all Mexican high cartel people, which they were not. Anyway, what happened was after about my third or fourth attempt to get they have protein in a little, not container, pack, and I could eat the protein. I could eat the peanut butter, so I said, just give me peanut butter. So I just started crying, which you don't do in prison. And I walked around, and I couldn't stop crying. I walked on the perimeter rather than straight to my bed. One by one, every one of the Mexican women walked by my bed without saying anything, gave me their cheese, gave me their protein. They would not let me be alone for the rest of the day. And then they said, come, do you know how to play canasta? I said, of course I do, I'm Jewish. I played with my grandmother. So, well, Mexican canasta is different. I said, I'll still beat you. So we played canasta, and it was for hours, and it kept you busy. And this was in a dorm room setting, which was horrible. What happened to these people is a different story, but by telling you that people instinctively and intuitively took care of you. The hardest thing was listening to the letters of children to mothers who were in prison. I went to the prom, I wish you had been here to buy a dress. They missed birthdays, they missed weddings, they missed funerals. I think the hardest was missing a funeral, because then you have no closure on anybody. So when I talk about trauma from prison, it's much more complex. The word trauma doesn't do it justice. There is a complexity of trauma that I think nobody looks at. And as we were speaking, it's got to be a new paradigm, because it's not just for this prison community. It's for the immigrant community, it's for the foster care community, it's for the vet community. We have a level of trauma that is complex. And so when you go into therapy, if the person working with you does not understand the complexity of the trauma and its impact, I don't think they can service you, and I don't think there's been any research done on what I suggested yesterday, which is one level of the trauma really starts with your arrest, where whatever were my issues, whether I had mild depression or mild anxiety, at my arrest, it altered my whole state of being. I know this for a fact. That when I saw my picture in the paper, I wasn't embarrassed. I just went in, I just lost something. You know, you spend your whole life building a career and being proud of yourself, and then in 5 minutes to lose that, to know that your reputation is ruined, is the first level of trauma that gets destroyed, that's identifiable. Then the second level is that your family members and extended family disappear. The third level is you have to plead to a crime or go to trial and hear them talk about you in ways that are unrecognizable. For me, I would not let my parents come because what they were saying was not true and could only cause pain. I knew I could handle it. I didn't want them to handle it. But when my father did come, he could barely speak for days after, you know. And that's why when the judge said to my mother, after she said, let my daughter stay home and take care of me or I'll die, he said, she's a monster. It's another level of trauma. So what we do not have in our possession, which we need to have, are videotape stories with carefully thought out questions about what people go through to bring. I can isolate it because I'm trained in research, but all these things, what the judge says to you, how it impacts you, and you haven't even gotten to prison yet. And you haven't even gotten strip search for the first time. When I interview people, the strip search story is the story that which happens in the first couple hours, that people will say to me. I had a young black woman who was very successful, came from a middle-class family, and one of her friends said, you work at this bank, we want to rob it. We want to rob another bank. So she told them how to. So they robbed it. They got $20,000, they gave her $5,000. So after they did it 3 times to banks, she said, well, I can do this. So she took her friend. She didn't think it through, and she robbed a bunch of banks successfully. And of course she got caught. And you don't know why. I mean, it was like a lark. It wasn't, I can tell you that it wasn't, yet was it premeditated? In my opinion, no, it was idiotic. It was idiotic. But I asked her on camera, or when I started to ask her about her strip search, she said, it was at the moment of the strip search I knew I never wanted to do this again. She served her time, she went out, she's fully employed. But a lot of people are in prison for just making dumbass mistakes. And so she's a bank robber. And it sounds dangerous and terrible, but she's not dangerous and she's not terrible. So trauma's complex. So what happened to me is that my dad was my biggest supporter. And he told me in 1998, after I was arrested, I was living in East Hampton, I had 4 pieces of property, and I was ready to retire. And he called me and he said, they're gonna take your property any way they can. You're gonna lose everything, you're 5 hours away from family, come home. I'm here, mommy's here. My brother's there, the kids are there. So I knew he was right and I moved home. And my father said, when your money runs out, I will pay for everything. So he literally paid from my insurance to my gas, everything, and gave me cash to live. He said, I want you to work with the attorneys. That's all I want you to do. I want you to be the paralegal for the attorneys, because that's what my attorney said, that it would be a lot cheaper. And I want you to bring down the cost and do nothing with this case. My father, who was very healthy, this was 1998, in January of 2002, just walked up stairs after breakfast and died. And we were shocked because he was not only not unhealthy, but everybody in his family lived into their 90s and he was late 70s. So my brother came to me, it's our tradition after we bury, to sit shiver, mourn the dead for a certain number of days. The first hour of sitting shiver, my brother, who I told my father, put the estate in Stephen's name because I don't want your money at risk. And they'll try to go after, and they did, and he had to spend money to keep his money. Put Stephen in charge, because my brother was living on a kibbutz in Israel. I didn't think he'd give a damn about money. He was there now, but I didn't think there was an issue. And the day of the shiver, my brother came to me and said, I'm not giving you a penny. Daddy left me this money for me, not for you and mommy. He loved me more than he loved you and mommy. And that's what he told his kids. And it was, so I was traumatized, so I had my lights were off within 3 weeks. My car was repossessed. So, and I had gone to the attorney and they had a superseding indictment charging me with another felony because they wanted to push me to plead guilty. So when I talk about stages of trauma, I'm not just saying arrest, conviction. There's an underlying family dynamics, there's underlying events, all identifiable, that people need to understand. Because it's my belief that the same is true for anybody who's never had this experience, but just in a different way. Divorce, loss of income from a job. When Lehman went down, everybody who I knew had to move and start working at age 50. I think any kind of loss starts this trigger down, and it should be examined because it would be an education. So he told me, now I was taking care of my mother, I lived with her. I moved out of my apartment to live with her. And I was her 24/7 nurse. So when I got to prison and I was allowed my first phone call, I called my mother. And she said, don't ever call me again. Stephen said, I can either talk to you or I can talk to my grandchildren, but I can't do both. He gave her Sophie's choice. Now, the pain I felt in that moment was the worst pain of my life. Nothing in prison compared to that pain, and nothing for anybody in prison compares to pain when it relates to family. I needed to cry hysterically, and you can't cry in prison because it's a sign of weakness. So I had to put it at a place where I couldn't find it. I don't know how I did that, but you have to. You don't have an option. And even today, I'll be watching a movie, what's the movie with the horse, that wonderful horse that won every award. Doesn't matter what it is, I'll be watching a movie and it'll have an ending and I'll cry hysterically. More than the movie requires, because I'm not crying about that movie. I have a level of pain that I live with that's would be unbearable and make me dysfunctional. So when you're dealing with formerly incarcerated people, I'm trying to give you a sense of the complexity of what they're going through. And on top of that, I had no way to earn a living or eat. I had no food. When I go home, my refrigerator is empty. I do these things, I make a little money, I survive another month, I have to keep going. So if any of you know other community colleges or any place for me to speak, I need that to
We're
survive.
eating samples at Sam's.
Yep, right.
To survive.
Don't tell them. Don't tell
No,
them.
I've read it in your,
I know.
it's on your website.
I have a list of publications which I'd recommend using.
Oh, yeah, I'm not telling Sam's.
No.
No.
What happened is I had no money and I was starving after my brother stopped. So I would drive to Sam's and eat samples for dinner. You have to be creative. So in prison there's many families you create in life all the time. And that's not just due to us. My closest friend is a woman who's been divorced, my cousin who's been divorced 40 years. As soon as she was divorced, she lost all the people in her synagogue because she couldn't afford to go back there. She lost all the couples friends because no one wanted a single to tag along with. So the experiences that you go through in prison are not dissimilar to other people's experiences. That's why I think it's so important that someone concentrate on this, the thing that breaks down the mental health that you're given and how it can break down, and more importantly, how do we bring it back up? You know, what do we need to do to bring it back up? So when I was awaiting trial during this 12 years, I decided to take a master's in Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene University, which was in New Jersey. I needed to do things that were a little different than, other than 24 hours reading my kids. And I wanted, and I've mentioned this, so some people know this already, I wanted to focus on the Holocaust survivors. I interviewed Holocaust survivors, but my focus was not pre-war or the Holocaust, which was well documented. I went to in Washington to the director of research and to the chief interviewer from the Holocaust Museum in DC. And I came with an interview that I wanted to give Holocaust survivors about what happened the day you walked out of camp. How did you, as a starving, stateless, homeless person, manage to get married within a year or two and have a family? What flip had to switch for that to happen? And how did they, if any, put away their pain? Because I believed, and remember, I hadn't had the prison experience. So they loved my interview. Unfortunately, prison got in the way of this, but I did have 20 interviews, which are remarkable. And what it was is they were teenagers, and they built community.
Are those available on your?
No, they're not available, because I want to do something with them. You can look on YouTube under Jewish Displaced Persons Camp and see segments of them. What was amazing is it made me laugh. Their resilience. I was hysterical over some of the stuff I was hearing, and I thought, nobody gets resilience. Nobody gets how you can be both a strong motherfucker and have suffered so much. And I really believe that people who suffer have much stronger, their strengths need to be studied, because they have an X factor as a consequence of the suffering that other people don't have, and if it can be defined and bottled, it can be used with other people in a similar way. So one of the things, one of my favorite interviewees, Hala Millick, said to me is, we got together every Saturday night for 70 years that we were friends. And every Saturday night we started our evenings with, we're not gonna talk about the war. That lasted 10 minutes. We talked about the war every Saturday night for our entire lives. And the message I'm telling you is, formerly incarcerated people have to be with formerly incarcerated people. We are each other's family because we shared an experience other people don't have a clue about. Just like when the survivor said, where'd you come from? We said, we're Union Feds, we're Union State. We have a language, which means for you to be successful with this, you have to find a way to mesh formerly incarcerated students who are willing to come out with formerly incarcerated students who need a little nudge. It's probably, you need to create the space for them to find without you being there. Because they are not gonna talk if you are in charge. You need a facilitator like me, or like somebody else who does this, who knows how to begin that conversation. So,
Can I ask you a question again?
Absolutely.
Sorry, y'all. So a hurdle I'm seeing to that, and as you talk, my head's going, you know that about me already now, but is when people come out, what every parole officer, what every counselor is telling them is get rid of your old connections, find a new group, find a new,
well,
right?
they're wrong.
And so, and I see your point now, I think they probably are wrong. So is there like a differentiation between formerly incarcerated people who go back to the old lifestyle and who don't? Or are you saying no one would want to go back to the old lifestyle given the right support system and given the right?
Okay, so there's a mixed bag. And I really want to play, if I can, is there a Wi-Fi? Okay, go to YouTube and go to Witness to Mass Incarceration. I just think this will be funny for you to watch. Okay, while we're doing that, and I'll tell you which one to pick out. While we're doing that, I think parole officers, whatever their intentions are.
Right.
they-
Parole, the court, whoever, yeah.
They have no clue what I've just said to you.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
The second thing is, they do not allow felons to talk to other felons.
Yes.
We do, or we wouldn't survive. We're the ones who, one woman has a connection to Whole Foods and other grocery stores in New York. And once a week, she says, there's 6 bags for you to pick up at 97th Street. Now, I can't eat everything she have, but I live in senior living, so whatever I can eat, I give away. That wouldn't happen in the real world for me. It happens in my world for me because she knows.
So that's another one of those paradigm shifts I'm talking about. What you're asking people to do in essence when you say don't go, is you're asking them to get rid of their entire support system, basically.
Right.
Abby is going to talk to us a little bit. Abby can talk about a few issues, and she wants to talk about a few issues, and I'm not going to let her. But it's important. It's very important. She wants to talk about what it's like to be a lesbian woman who is in prison and what that is like, but she also wants to talk about the experience of solitary confinement, and we basically flipped the coin. No.
No, okay, so I'll try to do this quickly. First of all, I think, thank you to Topeka, thank you to Andrea. These kind of gatherings raise attention to issues, and we need to do more of them. I want to say that I'm on probation, so I'm not allowed to talk to anybody who's formerly incarcerated. So those who haven't been, those who are not formally incarcerated, please take a picture with me so I can send to my probation officer and pretend that I was at an event that this is not. And please don't tell anybody that I actually know or speak to these people, or they will ship me out in a heartbeat.
We are not allowed to talk to each other, so the paradigm that's being currently used
John, just hit the button on that
by
side.
every parole,
Stay friends or be
we are all friends.
Well,
We find each other.
yeah, of course.
Facebook, we're all friends. And we're not closed about it, but you can get sent back to prison if you have a bad officer. However, the point is that we are, and the reason I talked about the survivors, is we are like them, we need each other. If people are walking around this campus and there's no identifiable place, if there's no similar place to an LGBT, a queer center, a Hispanic center, you have to have a center. There's no university that has it. They haven't been smart enough to create it. So even if you start it with 2 people, understand you're creating a space that is one of the most necessary spaces for their mental health. Those meetings, I am connected to formerly incarcerated people. I'm lucky, I'm an activist. But people who are attending your school, and it's got to be at least 1/10 of the population, don't have a space to call their own. So just as we acknowledge that people need spaces, whether it's Jewish students or whatever it is, you need that. And it needs to be run by for them. So in addition to these 4 little businesses, that's the other thing you need to create. And if anybody wants to ask me anything at this point, now I'll keep going. How much time do I have left?
9 minutes.
That's it?
Yes, ma'am.
I have about 20 more things to say. Oh, shit. All right, let me look through my notes. So I'll give you some statistics, which I said yesterday. So 41% of the 2.3 million do not hold high school diplomas compared to 18%. 48% of the general pop has secondary degrees versus 24% of incarcerated people. But again, 41%, these are what the bad numbers are. Of the 2.3 million means 943,000 people do not have high school diplomas. So when Obama announced the Second Chance Act, it only allows for 12,000 people. So there is a need that's being unmet that's tremendous. We know from every piece of research that education leads to a lack of recidivism, it leads to a job, it leads to people integrating more. Now, with all the inside-out programs, which I don't think is, I think it's, I'm not a peace person, so by going in, here's what happens. You go in, you teach someone a course, they walk out, you give them a backpack and a cell phone, you take them to where they're living, and you're done. So this 76-year-old man was just dropped off in upstate New York. He's 76. They gave him an education. There's no money for follow-up. What's he gonna do? He's never gonna find a job. And the problem is that you have to think through the needs, and it's not that hard. So 6% of the population right now has college inside-out programs. But even those are only dealing with the piece. So what I'm offering to do is create a program with you that thinks it through. You start with the pieces, but you know what the whole thing is at the end that you want to do. Because defining, I've never done a project in my life where I haven't defined every place I want to get to, but start with a little hill to climb. You just want to, so you know, Maryland and other states spend $12,000 for preschool and $7,000 for incarcerated people. Now, of the 147,000 that are in Texas, most are coming home. So you will deal with them one way or another, because they will be home. They will either be a homeless population, but unless they're directly helped, probably between 10 and 20,000 are coming out every year. And where are they? Does anybody have a handle on where they are? We have reentry organizations, we have commissions, we have God knows how much money goes to reentry, but I have yet in any state to ask the question, where are the 10,000 people? Can you identify for me where they are physically? You cannot get that question answered. The best hope to get that answered, you would think, would be parole and probation, but they can't even answer that because once the person's off parole or probation. So we punish people, but there's a no exit sign. Since it's only 5 minutes, I think there's a lot more I had to say, but I guess I'll leave it to questions. And I'm available. The best way is to set up a Zoom call, which I love, because that's in person. I have much more to say, but if we only have 5 minutes, and I'm willing to stay here if anybody wants to talk.
I just had a comment, and my undergraduate degree is in criminal justice, and I think I probably just learned more right here than I did. And I went to a good school. I was a pretty good student, so my emphasis was on juvenile justice, so thank you for being here. But one of the things about family dynamics, my brother's a criminal lawyer, and we had a friend who committed a crime, and he stood up for it, he did it. And he was from here, and the first thing they did was ship him to El Paso, to a El Paso state room. So first thing I thought was, what about the children? That was it. I mean, he did it, he's the criminal, but it just seems so unfair to the families.
Okay,
They
let's
were not
take
gonna be able to see their children.
So there's two
Their
things.
father, yeah.
The collateral damage is another piece
Yeah.
of the
yeah.
paradigm,
Yeah.
which is by arresting people, whether they did or did not do a crime,
Right.
and by isolating them from their family, again, whatever the crime is, you are creating a second generation of people that are suffering from the crime.
Yeah, yeah.
And and that, I think, is one of the worst things that can be done. If outside of serial murder, outside of serial rape, serial murder, outside of an extremely disturbed person, if we don't look things case by case, I believe people can be rehabilitated, you know. And what should be happening, we have no rehabilitation. But disconnecting him from his family means that there are 3 people in prison or 5 people in prison. And yes, that's an issue. But again, if I was saying I want to study a paradigm that I believe to exist, and I identify all these variables, I would start a 5-year research study testing out how these variables impact with each other. Because whatever you find out here, you're gonna find out relates to disabilities, things relate to each other. But it's a terrible thing to put a person on the other side of the
It was
state.
terrible for him and his family. And again, he's not blaming anybody for the crime, he did it, but it just seems that the children were, you know, the inability of the father. I mean, it was unrealistic for him to drive to El Paso ever.
No, but that's
Yeah.
common. And in women's prisons, if you don't sleep with an officer, in Florida, what they typically do is have you transferred to California. So not only is it, you're not gonna see your kids, you're not gonna tell on me, but I'm gonna send you so far that it financially incapacitates you. So how much do we deal with the system being brutal? And how much do we face the facts that we're a brutal culture, we're a punitive culture, we are an unforgiving culture, and that's really who we are. The question is, what does it take to become more forgiving? Frankly, I think prison does it for a lot of people. I think when you're stripped of everything you have and you have to start over, that you have a different kind of humanity. And it shouldn't take that. It shouldn't take doing something like that. I think that as much as I understood as an early feminist, as much as I knew when I was younger, had I not been in prison, I would have not understood or articulated what I'm saying today. So, come on, final comments.
Of course I do. I'm so sorry.
Just do it.
So, I mean, so much of what you're talking about, I think, is re-entry programs, or maybe not programs, but re-entry pathways that would allow people to start to build their lives back after this experience of being incarcerated. And it seems to me like so many times the state has an idea to do something like that, and then the way that it's actually put into place is a nightmare. If you look at halfway houses, for example, worse
should be
things
no
happen in
halfway.
halfway.
No, halfway houses should be run by, they should take the money that they're putting into halfway houses. The best thing they could do is to let a person go from prison to a place where there's formerly incarcerated people. They would run it completely differently.
Instead of having somebody who paid minimum wage, who's been on the take, is
Who can decide not to let you out to
right,
go get a job?
right.
You see,
And who's trafficking
I
folks
believe
through
the
there.
concept of reentry, but when you have lawmakers who've never been incarcerated, they're designing laws that don't make sense, you have to have an advocate in there who knows. I don't care how passionate you are, if you haven't been in prison, you don't know the issue,
Right.
period. So you have to have someone in there to say, no, this is gonna work. So I'm on the National LGBT HIV Criminal Justice Working Group, which is a loose coalition of 50 organizations working to improve the safety and dignity of queer people inside prison. So I was part of a conversation with the Bureau of Prisons about how important it was for trans women to have access to makeup in men's prisons. And I'm listening to this conversation for an hour about them saying you need to put this on. And I said to them, can I say something? Number one, we only get $320 to spend a month. That's about $75 a week. And if you have to buy a pair of sneakers, which you do, or a sweatshirt, which you do, or you have to replenish your shampoo, your deodorant, there's no room in there to buy makeup. So you need to. So you may not have that money. But second and most importantly, the prisons only allow you, the women's prisons, to buy one piece of makeup at a time. So they've now spent an hour talking about the importance of putting makeup in commissaries for trans women, when A, they probably can't afford it. You'd have to raise the limit or allow for special monies for it. And B, they, each commissary puts limits on how much makeup can be bought. Why have a conversation you know nothing about without someone in the room? So what happened is the activist community, who meant very well, started realizing they have to have, it was me and another guy at every meeting, because when they were having conversations, they were creating policies that were not helpful. So when you talk about reentry, the best thing to do is to bring in an advocate. But again, an advocate who's been in prison, and you have to have a plan, and you have to ask for what's needed. There's a lot of people who will take any amount of money to run a bureaucracy, which would be useless. And I really hate those people. They know who they are. And I think that there's gonna be they have no idea the blowback that's coming to them as we get more power and our voices are getting stronger. So I'm not the only one out there doing this. You saw that room full of people, and each one is as good as the next. I mean, but there's not a lot who may be as articulate or educated, because I have that privilege. But you're right, there needs to be a paradigm shift to be peer support instead of institutional support.
So somebody like Vanessa, who's on the governor's council, it would be interesting for her to, you know, if she could bring in guests, if she could bring in consultants, somebody who's, because that's what they're doing.
Well,
They're
that's
setting up
what-
all these big bureaucratic programs that
Yeah.
then end up not making any sense.
That whole, the focus, that is a focus thing on education.
Right, but other people that are on it, like the
Yes.
director of TDCJ is on that,
Right.
you know, so she'll have, and
So in New York.
I know him vaguely, but I don't really have a buy-in with TDCJ anymore. I've been gone 15 years, so.
The state that's doing the best is California, because they put formerly incarcerated people on those committees. When something happens in any federal prison, I have a relationship with the woman who's in charge of the 29 federal women's facilities. I worked hard to gain that trust. So, and I think I told you, or you, that there was no toilet paper in FCI Dublin in California. I wrote Alex a note saying there's a problem in FCI Dublin. She said, I'll take care of it, let me know if it persists. They want eyes and ears through back channels. So there's a handful, and I mean really a handful, of people who work back channel. Like
And I
maybe-
think in Texas, that's such a hard fight, because there's that blue curtain sort of thing, worse in Texas than maybe other places, you know, that very us versus them mentality that is just not helpful.
But how does that change? I'm gonna tell you. It's so changeable. I went to BOP meetings with the Attorney General's office, civil rights, everybody sat in meetings. I didn't, okay, so they're talking about PREA at one meeting. There's a room full of people. The meetings are timed, so everybody gets 3 minutes to talk. The meeting's over, nothing's accomplished. So they invited me to one of these meetings. That's how it started. And they're talking about auditing prisons. And so I was told explicitly that these meetings are structured. Once I got in the meeting, I'm listening, and I'm like, going like this. And the head of the BOP says, what is it? So I said, can you tell me the geographic breakdown, the demographic breakdown of these auditors? Are they white, are they black, are they old, are they young? Every head spin, like, to me this is like an obvious question. Are you sending white monitors into a black prison? What's going on? So they said, we don't have that information. I said, so you don't know whether you have a diverse group of monitors going in. It passed. Half an hour later, they say, well, many of our auditors are formerly correctional people. So people are looking at me like you're raising your hand again. And I said, are you telling me that all these auditors are former corrections people, and that you think that women who were sexually assaulted are going to talk to them? I said, it's never going to happen. The only person that an incarcerated person is going to talk to is a formerly incarcerated person, which means you've hired and trained and spent millions of dollars doing something that can never have accurate information. Now, I'm a fierce force on the BOP and that entire level, because they heard me loud and clear. That's why they gave me a grant. That's why they invite me to Washington. It's not there as a blue wall. It's that they don't have someone who's talked to them. Now, I was invited, with my deputy director, Zahara, who's a trans woman of color, to an implementation section with the state, with every state docs, wardens, pre-coordinators, and within an hour of them talking about us so horribly, in front of each other, I raised my, they brought me there intentionally. And they stuck me in a group with the ones who ran the state of Texas, the state of Kansas. And what I'm gonna tell you is, at first, they were defensive as hell. No, our prisons have no sexual assault, our prisons are this and our prisons are that. It was really hard for them to say that by day 2.
Yeah.
Because I was a reasonable person for them to talk to. So they now ask us to come in to talk to them in certain states. So what I'm telling you is, you can't send someone who hates them into the room. You have to have someone who's been formerly incarcerated, who
So
can.
how did you get a seat at the table? Because that's the issue. How did you get a seat?
Through the LG, I got a seat at the table because somebody was smart enough to
Somebody
bring
knew
it.
somebody who.
Yeah, so in New York, I was invited to the commission to speak. And once you speak, they know who you are. And you're not telling them they're a piece of shit, which I did not.
Right.
And it's helpful to them.
Yeah, I think it is. It's that foot in the door
They
issue.
actually are not bad people, but in not joining these two cultures, in not melding reasonable people with other people, you're gonna keep the same problem going all the time.
Exactly.